It's the World This Week. 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey, held captive in Gotham. He joins us from the Beast's headquarters in New York. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, hope to see you back on this side of the Atlantic soon. Joining us here in the studio, Dorian Malovic, Asia editor for French daily newspaper La Croix, the co-author in French of The World According to Kim Jong-Un. Sounds topical.
Yeah,
We'll
perfect.
talk about it in a moment. Gregory Viscusi, reporter for Bloomberg News, who's looking suspiciously tan. How are you?
Fine.
And we always love visitors on the show. France 24 New Delhi correspondent Mandakini Galot has joined us. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
All right, welcome to Paris. The World This Week on Facebook and on Twitter. The hashtag World This Week. Heavy on symbolism, light on substance, and yet history was made at the border between the two Koreas. Kim Jong-un becoming Pyongyang's first leader to cross the demarcation line since the end of the Korean War, and the Korean War, which split the peninsula in half for good in 1953. Kim reciprocating the gesture, inviting South Korean President Moon Jae-in to briefly smell the air north of the border. This before a state banquet replete with pageantry, and of course, there were speeches.
Standing face to face, I heartwarmingly realize that North and South Korea are not just neighbors that live separately, but rather a family. We, who live so close by, are not enemies that must fight against each other, but are more like families that share the same bloodline, who must unite.
We share the same blood, Dorian Malovic.
Definitely.
This is seems like a different Kim Jong-un from the one who visited China, who seemed a little starry-eyed a few weeks ago. And here he seemed so poised and in control.
He was among Koreans. I mean, the idea is that even though they are in the north and you have the Koreans in the south, the idea of crossing the border is really the peninsula. And the feeling had to be shared among the people that it was the same country, the same people. I mean, it was a lot of theater today, but anyway, it was historical day.
How historic?
Just because compared with the two other summits in 2000 and 2007, I mean, this one, the North Korean leader crossed the border to the south side. That was first. Then he invited the South leader to the north side.
That was unscripted.
Unscripted, and so that was very spontaneous. And he said, okay, he said, when I'm going to go to North Korea? And he said, okay, just go now. So a lot of symbols during this day, very important for the Koreans as a whole, you know. It has to be a seduction meeting, but it was more than that. I mean, if it was only theater, it would be empty, but the Panmunjom declaration at the end of the day was very substantial.
Very substantial. How is it playing where you are, Christopher Dickey?
Well, I think there's a fair amount of skepticism. Clearly, President Trump thinks that this is a great step forward, and he's going to take credit for as much of it as he possibly can. But we're a long way from reaching his goal, which is the complete elimination of the nuclear arsenal and the missiles of North Korea. And I think it was interesting that while there was a statement, a vague general statement about wanting to try to denuclearize the peninsula, when Moon Jae-in, the South Korean president, started talking about this in their joint appearance, Kim Jong-un stood there quite silent. So I think everybody's optimistic in Korea at the moment, cautiously optimistic, but I think there's also concern that when it comes right down to the Trump and Kim summit, it could be some pretty tough bargaining, and it could all end in tears.
Could all end in tears, Gregory Viscusi?
Well, I think maybe Trump might not realize that if you're talking about denuclearizing the Korean peninsula, it might apply also to U.S. ships that visit Korean ports. I'm not sure Trump realizes that that is part of the goal of what the North Koreans
or the
would want to see.
28,000 U.S. troops.
Well, they're not nuclear armed, but but that could be part. That could be part of the bargaining chip for for the North Koreans should they get rid of their nuclear weapons. We're far away from that. But, there is something that the U.S. will have to give up, too, for an agreement. I'm not sure that Trump realizes that.
Mandakini Gallat, it is a historic day. Just a few months back, we were seeing the tweets by Trump, the taunts by Kim Jong-Un, our correspondent in Seoul, saying people there had sort of breathing a little bit easier.
Well, I can't stop looking at the images from today. It's, like Dorian said, just beautiful diplomatic theater, but one really questions if it's more than that. And I think the delicious irony here is that it sets the tone for a meeting with President Trump, who will be expected to broker this denuclearization treaty. But on the other hand, he can't wait to blow up the Iran nuclear deal. So
that's a big point. I mean, why would the Koreans agree? Why would the North Koreans agree to an agreement with the U.S. when they tear up an agreement signed with Iran just a year earlier? I mean, it's a very good question.
Who here really has the vision to carry out this long-term treaty, and the patience?
Well, I can understand the skepticism. I mean, in Washington, in New York, all over the world. I mean, a lot of people. You can see what happened today with a very.
But here, the skepticism with Gregory and Mandakini seems to be over that summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-Un.
Yeah, but I think that. Okay, I can agree on those skepticism and on the doubts we have on the future, but we just cannot erase what happened today. I mean, we have gone a long way. You remember, we have been here many times, and you remember last year we were on the brink of war, and it was like between Trump and Kim Jong-un, it was a fight from a distance, And now the two big egos from North Korea and the States are in marching towards something more peaceful.
Reactions on the hashtag world this week. Very disappointed by the overly enthusiastic coverage.
Definitely.
North Korea has a history of breaking agreements, and people seem to have very short memories. A bit echoing what we heard from Christopher Dickey a moment ago.
No, obviously, I mean, if you look at past history, recent or past history, 2094, the KEDO, the agreement, 2007, what happened? I mean, of course, it was past history, but the situation at the time was a little bit different. I must say that at the time, I mean, North Korea was not nuclear, right? That was not, I mean, even in the communique of 2007, you can tell me there was the same words as today, right? Except for denuclearization, because now that's the big center point to solve. And I think that's difficult to solve, but the two Koreans going together had to succeed today to ensure that the summit in June happens, because it was not sure, and the substance what needed is in the communique. It's in the declaration. Now, it's up to the others, I mean, to Trump and Kim and Moon in China in the future to make the deal. Let's be very, very slow on that, of course. It's not, you cannot solve this 70-years-old problem in 2 months.
By the way, the big controversy of the day came during the banquet when dessert came around.
Okay.
That mango mousse decorated with a blue map symbolizing a unified Korean peninsula. Now, it included a small island that's the subject of a territorial dispute with Japan. Japan, which lodged an official protest to Seoul.
Obviously.
The island stayed on the mousse, I noticed.
Yes, but it's of course, but through that, it's very symbolic. Okay, the food was very symbolic. From the entree to the dessert, they were all symbol of the food from the south, the Kim Dae-jung birthplace. It was very symbolic. And then, of course, the Dokdo Islands, or Takeshima Island for the Japanese, is something that the Koreans, the peninsula, has the same vision on that. It's Korean. But that reminds us that the peninsula was colonized by the Japanese for 50 years before the Korean War. That shows that they shared the same past and the same problem with the Japanese.
And when you hear about the complexity of the problem, Christopher Dickey, what is your prediction when it comes to that summit with Donald Trump?
I don't think it's going to go well. I think there's a problem here, which is that Trump is sure that his hardball tactics have forced Kim to the table. And he's going to go, the bully that he is, and say, I really respect you, I really like you, Kim, you're an honorable man, as I said in Washington, but you've got to give up all your nukes, you've got to give up these missiles. This is not just between you and South Korea or you and Japan, this is between you and the United States. You want to say you have missiles that can carry nuclear arms that can hit any city in the United States? That's got to go, that's got to end. And Kim is going to say, the only reason you're talking to me is because I have that capability. Before I had that capability, Washington thought it could ignore me, put me on the back burner, leave this problem to other people. Now you, the President of the United States, are talking to me, Kim Jong-Un, in a one-on-one summit. That's what nuclear weapons have done for me, and I'm not going to give them up.
All right, well, one can only wonder if the summit between Trump and Kim will include scenes like this one.
It's a great honor that you're here. But we do have a very special relationship. In fact, I'll get that little piece of dandruff off. That little piece. We have to make him perfect. He is perfect. So it is really great to be with you, and you are a special friend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess it all depends whether Kim has got dandruff or not. Well, we'll find out. I don't know.
And doesn't speak English that much. That's a big difference.
Your thoughts when you saw that scene, Gregory Viscusi?
I mean, Trump likes this very, with the people he likes this very sort of, American sort of, bear hug affection. It was a bit strange. I think everyone found it a bit uncomfortable. I don't think there's much.
Mandakini Gallat, how did those scenes, the touchy-feely scenes, play in India?
Well, you can't help but feel a little bad for Macron. I mean, he has the burden of being the Trump whisperer. That's a bit of a responsibility.
Well, he chose it, though. He chose to be that. He did choose to be
That's true, but Trump is so unpredictable, and you feel bad for him. And in India, Macron is, we're very fond of him. He was there recently, and it was the first time a French president spoke to Indians in English. And so that was quite...
François Hollande tried.
He tried. Well,
he tried.
Okay,
a lot tried.
Christopher Dickey, before the visit, you predicted that Macron has got this. He knows how to play Trump. Now that the visit is over and you've seen that scene, do you still feel that way?
Well, I think he gave it his best shot, and I think that his relations with Trump probably at the moment still remain pretty good, even though when he spoke to the joint session of Congress, Macron laid waste to Trump's entire worldview. Almost everything he said contradicted the kinds of policies that Trump has pursued, the isolationism, the anti-globalism, the unilateralism, all of that, climate change, everything you can think of. He sort of refuted Trump's position. So how is it that he remains on such good terms with Trump? I think one of the secrets is something that people have observed with Macron over the years. He has a way of working with older people, particularly older men, where he winds up convincing them somehow that he's really the son they wish they had. And even if you look at the little dandruff incident, what is Trump doing? It's like he's dealing with his child. He's sort of brushing him off, says, we have to have him be perfect. There was, by the way, you could see in the video earlier, there was something on his lapel, I might add.
Dorian Malovic?
Oh my God. It's just, I mean, I don't know what to think about that. I mean, you're right about Trump. He's unpredictable. So you go to meet him, you have to know anything can happen.
How do French people feel? It's the president of the republic, and there's...
I think, okay, all the publicity in the French media about Macron and Trump, I mean, it was very, very positive, very ego.
Positive.
I mean, it's the French ego, He met the president, he met Trump, so it's a very powerful man. He's the only one now. There is not Theresa May anymore. He's the only one in Europe, maybe too much isolated, actually. But he's the one to talk to the president. But at the end of the day, I mean, no results concretely on Iran, the climate, or whatever.
Yeah, if Macron's mission was to sway Trump ahead of a May 12th deadline to stay in the Iran nuclear deal, then even before the French president had left U.S. soil after that 3-day state visit, he was already managing expectations telling students at George Washington University, quote, "It seems to me that Trump will not do his utmost to preserve the Iran deal," Gregory Viscusi.
Well, there might be a little bit of a reverse psychology going on there. I'm not sure if that statement from Macron is not a way to play Trump, who likes to be unpredictable. So as far as how the visit played on both sides of the Atlantic, I think no question it was more positive in the U.S. I mean, Macron won everyone over in the U.S. because both Democrats and Republicans saw things in him to like. France, people are beginning to question in France, what are we getting out of this? Okay, so he's the European leader closest to the American president, but do we really have to be that close to him? Are we really going to get anything out of this? And I think that the Iran deal is going to be a major judgment on whether it's worthwhile. And just very quickly, in outside of France, this played very badly. I mean, in the Middle East, in North Africa, and Africa, I think that the French are probably losing any thought they had of being sort of an honest broker in various things. They're seen as just too close to the U.S. right now.
Too close to the U.S. We're going to pick up on that when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is in New York City, home to headquarters for the Daily Beast. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Dorian Malovic, Asia editor for French daily newspaper La Croix. Your latest book that you co-authored, The World According to Kim Jong-Un, published in French. Gregory Viscusi, reporter for Bloomberg News here in Paris.
I'm particularly happy to hear about Abba.
Particularly happy to hear
the good news of
that
the day.
Yeah, we heard during the headlines that Abba's reuniting for those two songs. And France 24 New Delhi correspondent Mandakini Galot gracing us with her presence here in the French capital. Thanks for being with us as well. We were talking just before the break about Macron appearing too close to Donald Trump. Well, in his speech before a joint session of Congress, Macron spelling out major differences with the party that rules in the United States. He spelled out his support for the Iran agreement, for staying in the Paris climate change deal. More generally, he talked in the spirit of the Enlightenment era, in which France and the United States were founded in the 18th century.
I believe that against ignorance, we have education, against inequalities, development, against cynicism, trust and good faith, against fanaticism, culture, against disease and epidemics, medicine, against the threats on the planet, science.
Christopher Dickey, did I hear that correctly? Science got applause in the U.S. Congress.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand, and I'm not sure that people around the world in the Middle East, the kinds of people you were talking about, do understand. What Macron was doing was not only trying to win over Trump, he was trying to win over the American people. And his appearance before Congress was really amazing. There were both sides of the House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats, were standing up so often it looked like they were doing calisthenics. It was really quite a scene. And one of the reasons that he has to do that, one of the reasons he wants to do that, is because he understands very well that Trump always recenters his policies back to his core base, the base that he's promised things to. If he's promised them that he's going to tear up the Iran deal, it's very hard for him to go back on that. It's even hard for him to certify that the sanctions against Iran need to be waived yet again, which he has to do every few months. That's the May 12th deadline. So if Macron can make himself and his views more popular in America, in a sense that makes it easier for Trump to think about changing his mind.
But what does it say about the United States today when you've got a French president who says he believes in science and there's applause, a standing ovation?
Well, it means we're maybe not as ignorant as people make us out to be.
What were your thoughts on that, Gregory Viscusi?
Well, I wasn't really aware that Republicans were standing up at that line. I can't really tell. You can't really tell from the footage, whether it's the whole Congress standing up or whether it's for some things it was Democrats, for some things it was Republicans. I mean, certainly what he had to say was much more comforting to Democrats. I would say that the first day of Macron's visit was definitely for the Republicans, and the second day was definitely for the Democrats. But which I found there was a weirdness in that the first day was so touchy-feely as we saw, because you just showed that one dandruff incident. There was lots of other, there were hugs, there was hugs,
there was
kisses,
kisses,
there was kissing, there was holding hands. And then the next day he comes back so, very feisty and hard in Congress, and it's just kind of a strange imbalance over the visit.
An imbalance, Dorian Malovic?
Definitely unbalanced. I mean, it's the United States of America, and it's sorry to say, it's only France. I mean, even if my president speaks English, which I'm very proud of, really, I mean, I taught my children to say that when you speak English to foreigners, they are going to learn French because they know you better. So that may be an idea. But to express in English at the Congress is really something new. I mean, a French guy speaking English first, that's interesting, right? The substance, this guy is smart, right? Science, Enlightenment era, I mean, les Lumières, whatever. So, okay, that's the image of the France, the culture, the history. I mean, the history we shared with America. But Trump is just it's amazingly a Martian. I mean, for us in France. I mean, he is like, coming from nowhere. I mean, you don't know how to behave with him. You just have to, when you visit him, you just have to do what you can, right?
Mandakini Gallat, Trump a Martian for people elsewhere around the world?
I think Dorian might be onto something, but
it's an image. Right?
But I was watching Macron's speech and taking the English metaphor forward, I couldn't help but think if it wasn't for the French accent, yes, he's one of them. He reached for all the usual rhetoric and flourishes that American politicians usually employ, and it's really no wonder he got that standing ovation.
Yeah. That's smart.
He talked about multilateralism, got applause for that. Of course, Donald Trump's warm embrace of Macron that Gregory mentioned, in stark contrast of how he feels about the ultimate multilateral institution that nativists dislike, the European Union.
The trade with France is complicated because we have the European Union. I would rather deal just with France. The Union is very tough for us. They have trade barriers that are unacceptable.
Which brings us to the subject of Trump's Friday visitor. This time in the Oval Office, the U.S. president sitting down with the German chancellor. They did kiss and shake hands for the cameras, not like last year when it was noticeable in the Oval Office that when they even asked them to shake hands, they refused to do so. So perhaps they've broken the ice. But Gregory Viscusi, again, it's the question of, you heard Chris Verdicki saying about how Trump likes to keep his promises. Is he going to toe the same line when it comes to the EU, when it comes to Merkel?
Well, which he's not really made any promises to the EU, but I mean, I think with Merkel...
Well, he's acting tough on them when it comes to, for instance, trade, and still has that threat of the steel tariffs.
Yeah. I think, though, with Merkel, the problem with Merkel is that she was condescending at the beginning. I think that Macron was very clever at the beginning, well, clever, whatever. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but from the very beginning, he just, he was realistic. Trump is the president of the U.S. Deal with it. Whereas Merkel was a bit condescending, was a bit preachy about it. So I think that relationship got off to a very bad start. But Trump has never understood the European Union. He's never understood that countries in Europe don't cut their own trade deals. He's never understood that it's the European Union as a whole. And he's also misinformed about the trade barriers. I mean, I really don't believe that it's no harder for the U.S. to export to Europe than it is for Europeans to export to the U.S. Yes, here or there's some sectors where there's some weird rules, but on the whole, Europe is very open to U.S. business and U.S. trade.
On the hashtag World this week, this reaction, I hope, Trump, you can give her, Angela Merkel, the respect you gave Macron. Your history with this leader is not good. You generally show poor manners and respect. Chris Verdicki, do you agree with Gregory Viscusi that maybe Merkel didn't read Trump properly at first?
I think it was maybe that she read him and she just didn't like what she saw and found that very hard to deal with. And, you know, it is true that Trump speaks, especially in the early days, was speaking out of ignorance all the time. Ignorance of Europe, ignorance of the European Union, ignorance of NATO, constantly saying things that actually just weren't certifiably true. And I think that that's very disturbing for a leader like Merkel. But, you know, today they do seem to be doing better, but the German press is already being fairly cynical about this meeting. I think they've been saying, oh, yes, well, Macron got a state visit with a beautiful state dinner, all formal dresses and beautiful pomp and circumstance, and Angela Merkel got a glass of water.
Okay. We're going to turn our attention now to India, a court case that keeps sexual violence in the spotlight, with the life sentence handed down this week to a guru with millions of followers. Asaram Bapu, as he's known, has always denied raping a then 16-year-old girl during a retreat. That was back in 2013. The now 77-year-old preacher's conviction in the western city of Jodhpur comes amid outrage over the gang rape and murder of an 8-year-old, a separate assault on a teenager by a ruling party politician. Asaram's movement, by the way, grew from India's rural heartland to an empire with 400 ashrams, health centers, the whole thing estimated to be worth more than $500 million.
A man who holds such a position in society, the way he has projected himself in society like God, when such a man rapes one of his followers, then he definitely deserves to be given the harshest punishment.
Mandakini Galat, is this a turning point for India?
Well, I wouldn't quite say so, but everybody who's watching this story right now in India, it's sad to say, but people are happy about the fact that he's fallen. And there's been this continuous trend of godmen and very powerful men falling due to allegations of sexual violence. And that's definitely a change from pre-2012, before that protest and the big movement that we had in 2012. But it isn't quite enough. It's not enough because since then, even though there have been harsher sentences, there have been longer sentences, cases are going faster, sexual violence on the whole has increased. There's a 60% increase in the number of rape cases from 2012.
But is that reporting or is that actual? Is that they're being reported more?
Well, that's part of it. That's part of it, that they are being reported more. But when you consider the fact that the Indian government's own data points out that 99% of the cases aren't even being reported as yet, I'd say, there's some truth to that. The violence is just increasing, and it's because punitive action hasn't had the kind of effect that we thought it would. Initially, people thought, oh, well, we need to change the law. We need to bring in harsher measures. We need to make sure these cases go quicker. But now what's at stake and what everyone is discussing is that maybe cultural attitudes need to change. It's not enough to just change the legislation and hope this problem will just go away.
You mentioned 2012. That's when that Indian student was gang raped and murdered in Delhi. Those cultural changes, are they starting to happen since 2012?
Well, again, to a certain extent, if you watched Indian television before 2012, you wouldn't find anybody talking about sexual violence. And today, if you turn on the TV on any given day, there's women speaking loudly and speaking very boldly. So to a certain extent, that is there. But it needs to go deeper because Indian society, any conversation about women is infected with patriarchal attitudes where, it's all about male superiority and the social inferiority of the female. So that really needs to change.
Dorian Malavi?
I don't know much about India. I have a lot of questions on that, about the cultural dimension. Has it been always like this for many years, on this ethnological basis, on patriarchal, on religion, on social status? With the Weinstein case in the States, it starts now in a lot of countries that the reality of sexual violence is just popping up now. Like in China, it's new. The Me Too movement is going up, in South Korea, and even now in Japan. And that means it's an overall, I don't know if it's only in Asia, it's not only in Asia, of course, but now people are less afraid to talk about it. But it's going to take a long time about education at school, right? I mean, how do you teach the boys, and how do you teach the girls? That's basically how the parents are behaving that conduct to certain behaviors in the future. I mean, I don't know about how it is in India, because it's a huge country. It's not homogeneous. It's so incredible.
And I think that's really at the heart of it. How do you teach the men, how to change their attitudes? How do you teach the women to be more open and independent? And I think that kind of change is not going to happen overnight. Cultural attitudes, as we know, always take much, much longer to happen. And so it's quite hopeful what we've seen since 2012 in terms of, there's more acceptance to have a dialogue on these issues. You have, a political will to change legislation, but it needs to really, really go deeper. And this is a debate that we're having all the time, but I don't think anybody quite has the answers as to how this cultural change or attitude change is going to come around.
And next year, by the way, an election year in India. Another tale of accountability, but a very different one. Here in France, a corporate raider who took his family's century-old paper business, parlayed it into a multinational conglomerate present in 80 countries with interests in everything from shipping and palm oil to media, telecoms, and advertising, and who's now suspected of corruption. Vincent Bolloré, accused of managing communications through ad agency Abbas on the cheap for the presidential campaigns for the current leaders of Guinea and Togo, and then obtaining concessions to run the ports in Conakry and in Lomé in these images. In the case of Guinea, President Alpha Condé, months after his re-election, tearing up the existing concession to run the port and awarding it to Bolloré. France's 9th richest man, according to Forbes, was questioned for 48 hours this week and placed under formal investigation, along with 2 of his top executives. Your reaction to this story, Gregory Viscusi?
Look, I don't know the details of this case. I've not seen it in the papers, but it doesn't particularly shock me that someone who gets contracts in Africa has good relations with African leaders. It kind of works that way in our countries too. I just find I'm having a difficult time working up a lot of moral outrage about this.
Look, as an Indian, I was just kind of surprised because I thought it's fairly normal to have some kind of relationship with the leadership
Businesses
of the country.
in America give lots of money to American politicians. I don't think they're doing it just because they've got nothing better to do.
Chris Vicky, are you as unfazed?
I can tell you that story has zero traction here in the United States. The idea of corruption in Africa, I mean, that's a real shrug. And most people in the States have never heard of Bolloré. But I think I would agree with my colleagues on the panel that, this is kind of to be expected, not only in Africa, in politics, that there's a certain I'll scratch your back and you scratch mine approach to doing business. And sometimes it's better hidden and sometimes not. My first thought, and like Greg, I don't know the details, is that whoever lost those contracts has it out for Bolloré and is probably behind this investigation.
Well, there is, as a matter of fact, a Franco-Spanish businessman who's quite irate about everything, and that's where this whole came from. But of course, Bolloré's name is an important one for people who know French politics. Remember Nicolas Sarkozy, when he was elected president, still hadn't been sworn in. He goes on vacations on Bolloré's yacht.
That's one of the most richest guy in France. Successful guy. He has investments everywhere. Thousands of people working for him, companies. Listening to what happened in Africa, that didn't surprise me either. And I was just wondering suddenly how the Chinese are doing in Africa. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they are doing the same or even more than that. It's just the idea
Much more than that.
Why now? Why Bolloré now? I mean, it's an inside thing against him, because now he's got retired, he gave his child his inheritance. Well, we as you said, to be shocked about that, it's just...
And it's not just Africa, as I said. There's political donations and favoritism.
In Europe too. I mean, when you listen to the Malta scandal about the passport, everybody knows Malta is selling the passport identity to Russians and Chinese. How can you accept that Juncker knows perfectly the guy in Malta as friends at the EU in Brussels? So, now just to be like, oh, we are shocked. No, I mean, it's just terribly shocking, but it's the reality, and we don't have to be critical about that. I mean, I don't know what we can do about that. We can talk about that, but that doesn't solve the problem.
Before we go, since we have journalists around the table, let's mention the passing of a photojournalism legend. Abbas Attar, known simply as Abbas, died in Paris this week. He was 74. He covered much more than conflicts like the Vietnam War and the troubles in Northern Ireland. The 1979 overthrow of the Shah brought him back to his native Iran, where he recalls describing himself as a historian of the present. Abbas telling people in the streets who sometimes were complaining that he was taking pictures, saying, "This is for history." His emblematic photos include this one of Muhammad Ali training for the 1974 rumble in the jungle against George Foreman in Zaire. The 1978 photo in apartheid South Africa of a police academy colonel posing with black recruits. And many stories that go beyond hard news and address topics like religion. This 1995 image of a Palestinian funeral near Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque encapsulates both. Chris Verdicki, he conveyed news and emotion.
This is really a great loss. I was actually at the Overseas Press Club Awards last night, sitting with a lot of photographers, and everybody is terribly sad about this because he's recognized as one of the great photographers of his generation. And a lot of people, I don't think, realized that that there was any problem with his health or that there was any difficulty here. He was still working. He was doing great work until very recently. So he's a great photographer. I knew him slightly in the Middle East and was always impressed not only with his ability to take great pictures, but with his intelligence and his understanding of what was going on around us.
Yeah, and maybe one last photo of his we could show, one that was taken on the 1997 shooting of the film by Iranian director Kiarostami on the set of A Taste of Cherry, and in that you have a photo. We can maybe show it. We'll call it up later. Of the director looking out at looking out through a door on the set of the film. Abbas will be sorely missed. He was 74 years old. I want to thank our panel for joining us: Dorian Malovic, Gregory Viscusi, Mandakini Gallant, Christopher Dickey in New York City. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Charlie James.
Hello.
We begin with our top story.
Yes,
That's
of
that
course.
historic summit at the border, at the DMZ, the Demilitarized Zone.
Yeah, so we've been talking about this a ton, obviously, today, but I wanted to bring our viewers an interesting article that the Washington Post has, talking about, in case of a real peace initiative here, what would be the future of the DMZ, the Demilitarized Zone, that separated North and South Korea since 1953. Non-governmental organizations and European officials have long advocated for it to become a nature reserve. And that might sound a little bizarre, but there's actually inspiration for that right here in Europe, in Germany, which turned its own former border between East and West Germany into a nature reserve that is now known as the Green Belt and has actually become a big tourist destination for nature lovers. So it's not expected, of course, that the Koreas would reunify the same way, but that the DMZ would not remain how it is now, littered with landmines and snipers. So this walk towards the future has been getting wildlife researchers excited that perhaps they could soon have access to the area, and that perhaps it could become the same way as Germany's Greenbelt.
Do you see it, Dorian Malovic? You've been to the DMZ.
It's already a reserve, actually. You can go there, but you have a lot of species there survive, and they are free to fly, and north and south. So that's a symbol. But then the DMZ is 4 kilometers by
4 kilometers wide.
Wide, sorry, on 400 kilometers east-west. So you have several doors along the border. It can be done on specific areas. You can make national parks. You can imagine a park somewhere, but then you need to break up all the landmines, snipers, whatever, and to clean and demilitarize the zone. But that could be a good idea. It's already a natural park.
Right, so
anyway.
there's already a number of species that are thriving there that have almost become extinct because of war and development on the peninsula. So the Asiatic black bear, species of cranes, rare plants are already flourishing in this area, where in the rest of the Koreas, they've really suffered due to the population.
But don't you have deer missing legs because they've stepped on landmines? I mean, I remember reading that somewhere.
Yeah, it can happen, yeah, but I don't know how many mines you have, landmines you have in this DMZ, but in some areas it's not, you don't have landmines everywhere. I mean, you know, you have a lot of spaces. It's a huge space, actually. So the species you mentioned are really incredibly protected. And that's the demilitarized zone.
No.
Another story that you mentioned, one that's close to Gregory Vescusi's heart.
Oh, yeah.
That's right. So Abba, the Swedish band, has announced that they are coming out with new music for the first time in 35 years. So fans obviously really excited about this. This has been trending worldwide since they made the announcement on their Instagram account earlier today. So the decision to create these two new songs came as part of this Avatar tour that they're doing next year. So there's going to be two songs. We have the title of one is going to be called I Still Have Faith in You. We don't have a release date yet, but they explain that they're doing it as part of the tour. So here's what they look like today.
A little different.
But actually, because they're doing these avatars,
It's been 35 years.
and they said that they're actually being digitally scanned and de-aged, so that when people see them in these concerts, the avatars are going to look more like the ABBA we remember from the 1970s. So that's definitely interesting. But fans going online, you know, tweeting GIFs showing how excited they are, calling it the best day ever. Definitely a lot of excitement from ABBA fans, and people wondering if it's going to sound very similar to their music from the 70s, or if they're going to kind of bring a new modern twist to it.
What's your religion, Mandakini, when it comes to reunions of bands?
I'm all for it. I have to be honest, though, I didn't realize they were all still around. So I'm relieved.
Happy to just know that ABBA's all still alive.
Happy to know they're okay.
All right. As we are all. Many thanks, Charlie James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.